This episode is brought to you by Nespresso. Gift magical mornings with Nespresso Virtuo Pop. Compact and stylish, Virtuo Pop is made to meet every morning coffee craving. From espresso to coffee, hot or iced, at the click of a button. And celebrate the season with Nespresso's limited edition coffee flavors. Sweet almond and hibiscus, cinnamon and candied tamarind, and festive double espresso. Magic in the making. Shop the holiday gift collection exclusively at Nespresso.com.
This podcast is brought to you by Carvana. Carvana makes car selling fast and easy from start to finish. Enter your license plate or VIN and get a real offer in seconds, down to the penny. If you accept, Carvana will come pick up your car from your driveway. Or you can drop it off at one of our car vending machines. Either way, you get paid instantly. It's fast, transparent, and 100% online. Car selling that saves your time. That's Carvana.
Carvana.
Pickup fees may apply.
This October, the wrong station celebrates a decade of dread. You can read the show notes to discover terrible new ways to celebrate with us. Today's episode, in Velgomesh, is written by Alexander Saxton, performed by Anthony Botelho.
The general had an arm ring that could turn him into a dragon. But because he was so old and frail and crazy, the dragon it turned him into was old and frail and crazy too. Sometimes Morella would go out for groceries and get back to his apartments to find him dragging himself around after Jagoda on his sagging, scaly belly, ruining the floors, sometimes soiling them, while she giggled and tried to stay just ahead. When Morella entered, he would wheel his heavy, wattled neck toward her and lumber in her direction instead. She would jump over him and go to the kitchen to make lamb stew with hashkt. Whether he was dragon-shaped or man-shaped, it was very strange to live with a person who had been responsible for so many things, and to sometimes hear him discussing the Jeka Glachina campaign with himself, or to hear him in the other room getting drunk off of Zhitrak with some of the old officers, and to hear their delighted laughter when he began to roar about the Zizinci and what needed to be done about them. At times, her hatred of him was sharp and cold and clear. At other times, he was so lost and scared and confused of his own vanishing mind that she almost couldn't help but pity him. Once or twice a year, usually in winter when it wouldn't be noticed, she would take a day for herself and make herself presentable. Though she dressed conservatively, Tozar and the other guards at the door would murmur as she passed, and she would keep her head down and ignore them until they, and their American-made machine guns, were far behind. She knew they would make conjectures when she was gone. Her title was cook, but everyone knew she was more of a nursemaid. Once she'd heard Tozar speculate absently, "Perhaps she lets him drink from her." When she was out of sight, she would descend through the winding, snowy streets of the Byzantine quarter until she came to the old neighborhood, the Haida, which had been brisk and lively, apple-cheeked in the days of her childhood, but which was now empty and cold. Her visa, of course, was a good one, and when the arrogant soldiers at the checkpoint saw it, they would instantly become respectful. "What brings you to this part of town, Sposia?" their leader would ask. He meant the Haida. Politely, but insistently, she'd say, "I am on the general's business." Then the soldier would straighten and look down and say, "Of course, Sposia." And she would walk off between the old dark tenements where people used to live. It caused her terrible pain to walk through the hacienda. But that was the reason why she went there. Once, in the midst of winter, when a hard, snowy grit was blowing down between the brick buildings, she was approached by a dog. It was gray and heavy-shouldered, and had a wedge-shaped head like a fighting dog, and when she made herself big and shouted to drive it off, it approached her growling instead, with its yellow eyes wide. She backed away. People in Velgomesh had good reason to fear dogs. She was torn because part of her wished the soldiers would come and save her from the beast, but another part was more afraid of them than it. So she backed off, waving her hands and shouting. But in her heart, a third part of her almost wished the animal would leap and rip her throat and leave her bloody in the snow. Somehow she thought that would be fitting. It would at least be an end that made sense. But then a door opened in one of the tenements, and a man shouted, and something broke on the brick road at the dog's feet, pelting it with broken shards. The animal yelped and ran off into darkness, and more objects broke behind it as it fled. Then someone was ushering her inside and asking if she was all right. She was still so shocked by the encounter that she didn't look up until the man said, "Morella? Is that you?" It took a moment to recognize his face. "Ranier?" For a moment he moved to hug her, but then he realized it had been almost 20 years, and he hesitated, stuck out his hand for her to shake. His grip was warm and hard. When she'd known him, he'd been in school to be a painter. "Are you all right?" he asked. "It's so late to be out. Are you in trouble?" He meant from police or soldiers, but she shook her head. No, at least, just from the dog." She didn't mention her visa. She didn't want his look of kind concern to change. "Well, please, won't you come in to warm up? I've just made dinner, and there's a mountain of tea. Or krushrak, if you need something stronger." She accepted gladly, following him from the hall. One moment, dogs and freezing wind. The next one, this. It was like a dream. Everything so gold and warm in the small apartment in that half-abandoned corner of the city. "Right here's cheap," he explained with a laugh, using an old wood spoon to fill her bowl with shivap and rice and pouch. Nobody wants to be associated with Zizinsi. Well, who'd blame them? She didn't ask about his wife, Siva. It was clear he lived here alone, and had for a long time. Like Morella, he wasn't Zizinsi, but Siva had been. Last Morella had heard, the two of them had had a son. "What do you do these days?" he asked. The food was delicious. He'd always been a good cook. I look after an old man." "Oh? He must be very rich." She smiled. "Well, he pays me very little." Ranier threw his head back and laughed. It was the same clear laugh that she remembered. They talked for a while, as much about old times as they could without touching on painful subjects, and when she asked for a glass of that krushrak, for her digestion, he poured one for himself as well. And then, after another hour had passed, she gave him a certain look. But he turned away. Embarrassed, she stood. I should leave. But that was out of the question, of course. It was well past curfew now, and there would be worse things than dogs out in the street. He stood as well, equally embarrassed. No, he told her. "Please, stay. You take the bed. I'll sleep out here. I'm used to it." She dropped her eyes. "You're very kind." She made herself ready and went to bed, but she just lay in his sheets, staring at the darkened ceiling, feeling guilty. Later in the night, she got up and went out to wake him, and when he asked, "Is everything all right?" she drew him back into the bedroom, and this time he didn't turn his eyes away. It It wasn't like it was when they were both 17. But there was comfort. When she lay in his arms afterward, she asked quietly, "How can you stand it?" He tensed up at the question. She instantly regretted asking. At last he said, "I can't tell you about that." She wondered what that answer meant. It could have meant that he himself didn't know how he endured the conditions of his life. Or it could have meant he'd found meaning in some course of action unsafe to discuss. "Forget that I asked," she said. "Come here." At sunrise, she rolled over to find his half of the bed empty, and when she went into the kitchen, he was sitting at the small table, looking at the visa in her wallet, a sick expression on his face. "It's a very good visa," he said, placing the card back in her wallet and placing the wallet back down gently on the table. She said nothing for a moment. "It's just the old man I work for." "Well, he must be very rich, even if he underpays you. He must be very rich to get you that." He was looking in her eyes, and she couldn't bear to meet the gaze. "His family's connected, but he's just an old and crazy man. I cook his meals and clean his laundry, that's all." He was still looking at her. He didn't believe her. He thought she was a spy for the army or the special police, and his voice cracked when he asked, "Did you come here by accident, Morella?" She was on the verge of tears. I came to see the old neighborhood, that's all. I come every year. I didn't think I'd meet anyone. I just came to feel." "What?" She was too choked to answer. He searched her face. He couldn't believe her, because it was so plain that she was hiding something from him. He pushed back from the table and crossed the room, putting one hand to his forehead. He walked back and forth, his other hand working furiously. And he stopped by the desk and opened up a drawer and put his hand inside. She heard the click of something heavy, metal in his fingers. "Morella," he asked her, "have you killed me?" No. She sat down at the table and made herself small. "I swear to you, it's nothing like you think." He glanced back, his eyes so sad and clear. "Your collaborator. No, Rainier, never." But she wasn't convincing, even to herself. And there was no knowing what books or papers she might have found in his apartment while he slept. For a moment, he stood frozen, with that one hand in his desk. She was certain he would kill her. Then he let go of a breath and closed his eyes and shrank. He released that heavy, hidden object, and then closed the drawer. "You should leave, Morella." She went. On her way out the door, she told him, "I promise, Rainier, it isn't like that." He only looked at her. "I thought you'd changed." She climbed back up to the Byzantine Quarter and stopped to collect a bag of groceries so that she would look like she'd just been out on errands. But at the door, Tozar wasn't fooled. "You didn't come home last night." "I was out walking late. It was almost curfew, so I stayed with my aunt in Bereki." "Ah." He smiled thinly. "I see." As she passed, he muttered something lewd to the other guard. She pretended not to hear them as they laughed. When she came back to the apartments, the general was in his dragon form again, and he had cornered Jagoda on one of the couches, and she was laughing and yelping as he made love to her, clawing at the feather pillows with his scaled talons. Morella dropped the groceries in shock, but Jagoda wasn't ashamed and made defiant eye contact until Morella dropped her gaze and hurried back out into the hallway to wait. It took about 15 minutes before everything inside was quiet. Then the door opened softly, and Jagoda stepped out. Seeing Morella, she looked her up and down. "Well?" Morella said nothing, looked away. Jagoda sneered. "You're jealous. He's a powerful man, and he wants me." They were both old enough to remember when the general was young and tremendously handsome. Even though Jagoda was older, Morella could remember what it had been like to stay up and watch him on television, what it had been like as a young adolescent to daydream about his poster on the classroom wall, those first stirrings of something that now sickened her. "I'm going out." Jagoda tossed her hair. "Cook him something when he wakes up. I'll be back tonight." She gave Morella another look down, and sneered, then left. Inside, the old murderer was drowsing on his couch. Jagoda had draped him with a sheet, but he'd kicked it away. His armband had slipped off during or after the act of lust. It lay on the soiled suede beside him. She passed into the kitchen and put away the groceries. She started to cook. Her hands made what they wanted to. Her mind was busy. When she finally paid attention, she found that she was making shivap with rice and pouch. Suddenly, she was overwhelmed with shame. She turned off the stove and stepped out of the kitchen. In the paneled den, the old man was still asleep. And maybe Jagoda had been menstruating, because she now noticed a little bit of blood on his hands. She stepped close to look down at him, down at those hands. There should have been more blood than that. How much in a human body? 4 liters? 5. And in a child's? 3? 8 liters, then, at least. And that just for Siva and her son. She picked up the arm ring. It was heavier than it looked, made of true gold, studded with little amethysts and purple garnets, and beautifully engraved with fans of dragonish wing. She slid it over her hand and onto her wrist, not believing the vastness of her own transgression, even as she did it. The dragon she became was like she was, unremarkable and hunched and gray. She caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. Then she did something even more unthinkable than putting on the bracelet. She bent down and unhinged her jaw and scythed her teeth, almost severing the old man's head from his neck. It was much easier to do when you were a dragon. She hunched over him for a few minutes, and when she turned and dragged her swollen bulk toward the window, he was nothing but a ruined mess of blood and splintered bone. And she, suddenly, was huge and ruby red and gold, and her scaly hide resounding with the light. She broke through the great glass window of the apartment, and the guards screamed on the road below, and Tozar raised his American gun to fire, and she let forth fire of her own, and blackened the pavement underneath him as he died. Then she hunched into the air and spread her wings. A bright, blue day had risen over Velgomesh, and she gloried in the freedom of the air, soaring and climbing toward the east. The Wrong Station is made possible with the generous support of our listeners on Patreon. Join us today at patreon.com/The Wrong Station for bonus episodes, behind-the-scenes content, ad-free listening, and additional goodies celebrating our decade of dread. The Wrong Station is co-produced by Alexander Saxton, Anthony Botelho, and Jacob Duarte Spiel, with music composed and performed by Alon Citrin, and arranged for the viola and performed by Viola Schmidt. You can follow us on social media at The Wrong Station, or email us at thewrongstation@gmail.com. And until next time, thank you for listening.